welcome once again to another episode of Getting to the Top, where I interview transformational leaders about their journey to the top and about some of the amazing things that they're doing in their industries. And so with me today, I'm delighted to have the incredible Nalini Sooklal, and she is the General Manager of Recycling Partners of Jamaica, although she's Trinidadian, but General Manager of Recycling Partners of Jamaica. And she's had, I've worked with Nalini over the years, and she's had an amazing journey. So I'm really excited to be having this conversation with her today about getting to the top. Welcome, Nalini.
Thank you, Racquel. Always great to catch up and chat with yourself, a very inspirational woman and doing great work, more so in our area recently of climate change.
Thank you so much. And no, it's really, really an important time, which is why I'm so excited. So tell us a little bit about your work at Recycling Partners of Jamaica.
Right. So in 2019, after a bit of a hiatus from what I call the public sector and becoming a little bit jaded, I felt compelled to return to what I call my core area, which is environmental protection, conservation, management, and the opportunity came up to work with the RPJ, as we called it. And I was drawn to it. The RPJ is a public-private partnership. And so it was formed voluntarily by the manufacturers and bottlers in Jamaica who generate a large amount of PET and HDPE plastics by way of their operations. And they came together and recognized their corporate social responsibility and said, we want to start this company and we want to institute a deposit refund system for plastic bottles in Jamaica. And so I had this lovely opportunity to look at a new model, a hybrid model that saw the public sector coming together to work with the private sector, as well as NGOs and CBOs across Jamaica. So I jumped at it. I thought this model has to work. And I'm happy to report that it has worked. And as of May 2021, we launched a deposit refund system for plastic bottles in Jamaica, where for every kilogram of plastic that a person returns to a depot or to a redemption center, they receive 50 Jamaican dollars per kilogram. And so it has been both a motivational factor, and we're seeing an uptick of real awareness, many Jamaicans deciding to take responsibility for their environment by way of recycling. So it's been incredible. I'm hopeful that we can replicate it across the Caribbean. It has tremendous impact on various aspects of the environment.
Fabulous. So tell us about your journey to this role, because you talked about a little bit of work in public sector, and that's where we met. So tell me a bit about your career to this point.
Yeah. Well, Racquel, it's been quite interesting. The last decade of my career, I came right out of university. I did a master's degree in environmental engineering after doing a bachelor's in environmental management. And, it was a bit of a contrast for me as a young person. Environmental management, the theme was, your conservation, preservation, and the engineers are break everything, we can fix it. And I came out, I said, how am I going to contribute to society? And so I started work one of the ministries in Trinidad and Tobago in the public sector, mid-managerial role. And it quickly grew on me. I had quite a great opportunity to work in policy, which I currently really appreciate, the legislative aspects of the environment, and more importantly, the multilateral environmental agreements that Trinidad and Tobago were signatory to at the time. And my niche area happened to be solid and hazardous waste management. Not many women in that field, and as I expected, not very appealing to many persons. And so, I worked in the public sector for a number of years. I was able, at age 27, I was asked to chair the board of directors of the Solid Waste Management Company Limited. And it was a daunting opportunity for a young person, but I jumped in nonetheless, because I believe I had the opportunity to inculcate some change after having worked in the sector for a number of years and hearing the same complaints over and over. Nothing is happening. Why aren't we progressing? Everybody's moving ahead. And so I jumped on that opportunity. So I had quite a run in the public sector, but, it became a little bit jaded for me. I thought, we sat in a lot of meetings. We had a lot of sessions. We attended a lot of international meetings. And I felt a little frustrated not being able to translate that into action, into tangible results, whereby Trinidadians and Tobagonians could begin to make a difference when it comes to solid and hazardous waste management. So a bit bittersweet. I dabbled in entrepreneurship when I took a little bit of break. I have absolute and profound respect for entrepreneurs, and especially women entrepreneurs who've started a lot of small businesses. It is, a tremendous and humbling experience, and I learned a lot from it. And during that 10 years, well, I also spent a decade as an adjunct lecturer with the College of Science and Technology, COSTAT in Trinidad, where I taught various environmental subjects for well over 10 years. And I like to call that my fun job. I would do it part-time, but it allowed me to interact with the young people and to have a very real relationship in terms of how they were viewing the subject area and them recognizing the potential that they had to contribute to this sector in a real meaningful way in a couple of years. So those were some of the roles that I've held all over the place. There's been not one steady path, but that's one of the lessons that I've learned, as a planner myself. We can plan a lot of things, including our career trajectories, but somehow it happens in the right order and direction, I would say.
Do you think sort of having in mind what you wanted to do at the start was sort of the best positioning, and then that helped you to navigate through different roles and then ultimately get to the leadership level?
Racquel, it was a bit different for me. I honestly never set out with the intent to lead. My intent always from the very start was, how can I be of service? How can I contribute to the growth and development of a country that had given me so much? And especially in an area where I felt very passionate about, and I felt had not gotten or received the attention and due respect that it deserved. And so really my intention was, how am I of service? Where can I make a difference? And in answering that question, it sort of led me onto that path. So it was a bit of an evolution, I would like to say. There was no fixed path, there was no master plan, there was no, and even though we like the plan, I like to reference the last 2 years that we've all experienced. You just have to gauge whether your path and what you're doing is aligned to your core values and how you feel. So, I never set out with the intent that I'm going to lead. I set out with the intent of, where can I be of service? And I guess that approach has served me in the sense by opening a lot of opportunities that has allowed me and have allowed me to be a leader in that sense. So it's still a strange term for me, I work a lot with various organizations and a lot of grassroots organizations, as we like to say, community levels, NGOs and CPOs, and it keeps me very grounded and always very inspired. So it's great. It's great to just have that connection with what you're doing, have that passion with what you're doing. And I think that propels you ultimately into these leadership roles. It has been for me anyway.
It's funny, as I've talked to more and more of these transformational leaders like you, it's been interesting that no one started out with a plan necessarily. Everybody just sort of happened across, and then something presented itself and they're like, okay, and let's do that. And it's curious to me, but one common thread that goes through it all is a passion, and a passion for what you're working on, and having that passion sort of get you the recognition that you require. But who would have been some of the people that would have helped you along the way or positioned you? I mean, I'm just imagining a chairman at 27. That had to be incredibly daunting.
Yes, I mean, honestly, I've had a lot of persons recognize my potential, and it really was not my idea at 27. It was not my intent, I was serving in the ministry, I was serving in mid-management and taking on a lot of additional roles because, wherever you can contribute, that was my motto and approach to many things. And I was asked at the time by the then minister, where else can you contribute your skill sets to? How else can you do more? You know, where do you see yourself? Immediately, because of my work in solid waste management and the familiarity with how little the sector had evolved at the time, I said, please, you know, if there's an opportunity there, I would love to make a difference there, you know. And somehow it was heard, and and it was said to me, if that's the opportunity you want, we'll see. And it came to me, and I, you know, in the moment, it didn't occur to me, but when I sat down and I was preparing for my very first board meeting, I said, what are you doing? You know, can you do this? Can you really do this? You know, a company of 200 plus people, a company that had been at the time almost 30 years in existence, that was enshrined in its ways. How can you really make a difference? But I was supported by a lot of people, and I learned along the way from a lot of people. And really, that has been one of my biggest takeaways, Racquel. You know, even if you think you can't do something, you have to approach it with an open mind and with the understanding and the ability to accept help and to accept assistance and guidance where you need it. So I've been supported by fellow directors and key persons in the industry as well, who came on board and said, if we're doing this, let's make a difference. And it worked in that regard. So I think, you know, we have to be open to accepting help, and we have to be open to allowing ourselves to be assisted where we need it, and recognizing good advice and being open to taking that as well.
No, I think that's very, very sage advice, being willing to accept help, being, you know, approaching things with open-mindedness. But one of the things that you said that really struck me as well is being willing to put your hand up and say, you know, this is where I see myself having an ability to make a difference, and then having that come to fruition. Because I think sometimes that's the thing that doesn't happen, that women see an opportunity, or diverse leaders see an opportunity, and then they don't say anything, or they just hope that they'll get recognized. You know, at least if the question isn't asked, then to say, you know, this is an area where I think I can have a really meaningful contribution.
You know, and it applies throughout, Racquel, as well. You know, if you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Yes.
And that's really the approach that I've taken. And, you know, and even if the answer is no, maybe it's a redirection in that regard. So
maybe
you
it's
know, you're
now.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think it's a valuable lesson for lots of women. Ask, you know, have a seat at the table, put your ideas out, be firm in them, recognize the contribution that you can make, and take the opportunities, learn along the way. That's at least been my approach.
Fabulous. And so you also said that, you know, you wanted to make a difference. So tell me a bit about the transformation, either at Recycling Partners, because I know you've grown the team tremendously and you guys have done, but in your past experience, tell me about a transformational change that you've been at the helm of, something that you're especially proud of.
Well, there are a couple of things that stood out to me. You know, at Swimcall, we were able to launch the first ever PET recycling plant in the Eastern-speaking Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that was phenomenal at the time. It was forward-thinking. It set the bar for where we were heading in terms of PET recycling, plastic recycling, how we're going to manage our landfills. And being the first in the Eastern-speaking Caribbean, I thought it was pretty visionary at the time. And so I was, you know, it's been one of my greatest accomplishments in that sense, being able to set that vision and path for recycling in Trinidad and Tobago. I also spent some time as the CEO of the Seafood Industry Development Company Limited. And incidentally, we were at the forefront in a lot of research in freshwater shrimp aquaculture, and the ability to bring that element of technology to Trinidad and Tobago, I thought had great potential, both for export and for our local production and consumption rates. So that was one project. The small things also count, Racquel. You know, in that capacity as well, we worked with the Digicel Foundation one time, and we hosted a youth fishing clinic. We brought women and girls and young men as well, together from rural parts of Trinidad, to introduce them to technology, to show them different aspects of this business that was aquaculture. We particularly focused on fishing villages where they were doing things in traditional way. It really made a great impact. You know, we had 40 or so young children coming together. And they said at the end of it, I would have never had the opportunity to see the things that I saw. So, you know, as I said, I work a lot with grassroots. We work a lot with organizations and women organizations and entrepreneurial organizations, and they really keep me motivated. In Jamaica as well, mainstreaming recycling, as I like to call it, and being able to launch a deposit refund system, putting together the framework for recycling. And as I said, you know, Racquel, for me, I've spent a lot of years also in high-level meetings and, you know, at the very top, and what we tend to sometimes refer to as talk shops. But in the latter years, being able to translate a lot of these ideas into actionable projects, the projects on the ground that have been able to impact many, many lives. Recently in Jamaica, we worked with a group of women as part of a gender project in a depressed community who had been the victims of various forms of violence, domestic violence, and so forth. And they were able to form a cooperative and through recycling become entrepreneurs. They're now self-sufficient, they're earning income, they're saving the environment. They are really, really champions in their own right and motivating their community. So these are the women really that I draw inspiration from, and it happens absolutely on a daily basis. And it really, really encourages me. You know, sometimes you get jaded at the top, you know, and sometimes you sit back and think, what am I really doing? Particularly in the area of the environment. And I'm sure, you know, with these grand targets and, you know, sometimes it feels, how are we really going to execute this? How are we going to achieve it? So I've been able to see some milestones and to really celebrate them. And I have great hope that we're going to have a lot more to come, especially in the area of plastic recycling.
Good, I'm really excited. You know, the part of your work that is especially fascinating, and certainly from the community-led work and the community-led cleanups, et cetera, and creating entrepreneurs, there's so much to unpack there. But I think the first thing is that private sector taking ownership, because I think that's the kind of transformation that we need. And how, you know, how did that come about, or what made that happen? Because I think we need to see so much more of that private sector recognizing a need and taking that leadership to change the way that things are.
Most certainly. I mean, honestly, Racquel, when I heard about the Recycling Partners of Jamaica, and the chairman of the executive chairman was in Trinidad at the time, and I had a meeting with him, and I said, you know, I'm really curious about this model because I've spent many years trying to get legislation passed to execute something just like this. Yeah. So how is this working? You know, and the beauty about it is that it is a voluntary system. You know, I spent many years of my career saying voluntary compliance is an oxymoron. It never happens. You need a big stick. And this example is really an anomaly. But I think the Jamaican companies, and I give them absolute kudos in terms of their manufacturers, and even now their distributors are coming on board, people who are importing and distributing plastics. They are sort of inspiring each other. So when the larger companies are participating, everybody is saying, well, I have to come on board too. It's sort of this ground movement where everybody wants to be a part of it. Because if you're not a part of it, I guess you're frowned upon a little bit. You know, we are moving to the stage where the bottles that are being manufactured in Jamaica are actually being labeled with Recycling Partners website with in Jamaica, we call it a money back bottle, you know, in keeping with its, you know, the slang and something that people would understand. They're money back bottles. So I give them kudos. I think it was through a lot of consultation with the government, recognition of the role that they had to play, and ultimately wanting to take responsibility for what's happening. You know, the beauty about it as well, Racquel, is that a lot of the Jamaican companies, Cinco, for example, they're the distributors for Coke. We have Pepsi Cola Jamaica. So we have a lot of global brands, and they've given global commitments on a large scale in terms of using rPET and then the percentage of rPET that they're going to be using by 2025. So they were happy to find an organization, to be part of an organization like the Recycling Partners of Jamaica. And these manufacturers and bottlers formed the board. And in addition to them, there are several sectors of society. There are governmental representation, there are NGOs and other NGOs and CBOs that do environmental work. So it's such a hybrid model. And it has been very inspirational. So I keep saying that it is a model that ought to be looked at across the Caribbean, and one that we really, really should be highlighting a bit more, the public-private aspect of it, that is voluntary.
Yeah.
Because our line of work, legislation takes a long, long time.
Exactly. And you know, waiting for the legislation, which can sometimes seem draconian, versus, listen, let's take matters into our own hands and decide, what do we think is the right solution? We're all sharing this planet. But I think more than a Caribbean example, this is a potential global example, because it's not happening everywhere else. You know, it's not just in the Caribbean where it isn't happening. So I love that, you know, we have you leading on something that has potential global applicability.
I was very, it was what initially drew me to the RBJ in terms of this unique model. And I was very curious to get it to work, because I really, really believe that the potential that this has in terms of a model working. And, you know, the next phases are really exciting as well, Racquel. You know, we're looking at circularity now. And so these said companies are now doing their own R&D into, okay, we are paying to have this PET collected. How do we process it? How do we utilize it back into our operations? So that level of R&D is beginning now. So, you know, we've started the process. We've educated Jamaicans. We've gotten them on board. And cultural change is never easy. I call it at least a decade-long process for us, especially in the region where we're accustomed, you know, garbage goes in the gullies, garbage is burnt, you know, it's just a traditional way. So we are really aiming at a cultural change, a social change. We're onboarding brand ambassadors. We're really going at it. But on the back end, we're working with these said companies again to incorporate an element of circularity and see, okay, we can't send this plastic off island, as we say. You know, it's just not sustainable. Nobody wants just now, you know, with the amendments, the recent amendments to Basel Convention, with the new commitment to plastic waste convention and so on, nobody is going to accept used plastic pretty much. It's waste in that sense. How do we make it a resource on island, and how do we complete that loop for Jamaica, but also for the region?
Yeah. Well, we have a really exciting partner that we're working with at the accelerator, but that's another discussion that we'll have, that we're really excited about in terms of how this can feed into this whole loop of creating new solutions from waste. But you know, it's funny, and I'm about to say a sentence that is going to seem strange for me to say, and even stranger for people to hear. But I was having a conversation with Richard Branson, and he was talking about the carbon tax. And he was saying, listen, you know, we need to find a way for the private sector to get more involved in taking responsibility for their carbon emissions. And we talked about, well, what about a carbon dividend versus a carbon tax? Something that, instead of it being public sector down on private sector, but private sector investing in sustainable solutions that can ultimately help them to lower their carbon footprint, and how something like that, this could be so incredibly beautiful. And what you're talking about and what is happening in practice is exactly this kind of model where you see the opportunity, you take responsibility, you take action, and years later, here's this magnificent solution where everybody's coming on board. And if you're not in this club, you're not one of the cool kids, you are not doing your part. I love it. I love it.
You're right, you know, and I think it has a lot to do with ownership in that sense. And I think the bottlers and the manufacturers felt a bit comforted by the fact that they were going to execute. You know, the mandate was agreed on at a top level, government and the private sector. So there's no, you know, divergent views on what the mandate is and what the targets are, but the execution of it was left to the private sector, guided and supported by government as well. So in alignment with government policies, in alignment with government commitments, in conjunction with other similar organizations. So, you know, I say it every single day, Racquel, you know, collaboration over competition.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
In our line of work, you know, sometimes it's my organization or your organization, or I say it every single day, our goals are aligned, especially with regards to the environment. We oftentimes, with other NGOs and CBOs, we have similar or same goals. So collaboration over competition. This is not a competition, you know, we're all on the same trajectory.
That's such a good point. I mean, I think when we work with other organizations, we see all the time, you know, they're like, isn't so and so doing some similar activities? And we're like, listen, we would love to not be needed. We would love for our work not to exist, and we will go off happily doing something else. But the fact is, all of these things require a level of collaboration, require as many hands as possible on the table, you know, taking action, making sure that we're meeting the targets that we've set. So I think it's incredible work, and hats off to you on the work that you're doing. I do want to know though, what's the best advice you've received in your entire journey?
Well, this is a difficult one. I'm trying to, you know, put it together. But, you know, my parents, Racquel, I'm one of 3 girls, and we were raised very independently, you know, there were very little limitations. But my parents have always said to us, whatever you choose to do, be the best. Be the best, you know, and they have never put caveats or limitations on what we were to study or what we were to become, but simply whatever you choose to do, give it your best and do your best. And that has just been my guiding approach to things. And the other bit, you know, it's sort of a quote. I went to a Catholic all-girls high school for 7 years of my life, and we were led by our principal, a phenomenal and fearless woman. And every single day she would say to us, and that's, you know, a couple hundred girls, to whom much is given, much is expected. Luke 12:48, incidentally, a biblical quote. And it has stuck with me, you know, and really and truly, the way that I've interpreted it is, you know, if it is that you have been blessed with anything, you know, a talent, wealth, you know, many things that, you know, it could be knowledge and time and or whatever your talents are, that it is expected that we benefit others. And so that has really been 2 of my guiding pieces of advice, or, you know, sayings that have stayed with me and guided me, you know. And I feel that not just in the environmental sector, but generally as a society, and one that has many gaps to plug in many fields and areas, that we have to develop and recreate that sense of responsibility. So to whom much is given, much is expected.
And you talked about the importance of service and you looking at your leadership journey through how can I serve? What kind of leader are you? How would you describe your leadership style?
You know, I've always been, I guess if I have to put a style up, a participative leader, you know. The importance of a team cannot be underscored. We've been working remotely for a number of 2 years now, almost. And I think we really acknowledge that in being separate from each other. But the recognition, and I've seen it from the onset, you know, recognizing that everybody has a unique perspective from where they sit, unique talent. Sometimes as a leader, they may not be matched to the areas that they are executing, but that's part of leadership, recognizing the talents within an organization or within a team and putting them to work. So I've always been a very open door type of leader, participative leadership, great ideas come. I put no limitations from everybody in the organization, and most organizations that I've worked with would say the same thing. It's an open door, an idea about anything, how the vehicles are to be parked, what they should look like, what the branding color of the company should, every idea, you know, it's always open in that regard. And it has been successful for me. That model has worked for me thus far, you know, recognizing the role and contribution of each member and the importance of a team.
Yeah,
you know, it's part of our success model.
But I think that's such a great style, because everybody feels ownership of what's happening. And so you get away from that. Well, that's somebody else's job, because if everybody gets a chance to contribute, then this belongs to all of us, and we all have a stake in how it happens, and making sure that it happens, and setting the goals and objectives, and meeting those goals and objectives. So what a wonderful style, especially when you are embarking upon a space, especially in Jamaica, that's not been done before, in the Caribbean.
Yes,
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we close today?
Racquel, I think it's great. Thank you for having me. I mean, the idea, it forced me. I said, what am I going to talk to Racquel about? And I looked at the questions, and it forced me to reflect, and reflect on a journey that oftentimes I don't, in that sense. We're always in this.
You're always looking forward, you're not looking back.
Exactly, And so as I sat and I looked through and I said, if I were to tell anybody, younger me, I tell myself all the time, we just have to look for finding what we're passionate about and ways that we can be of service. Generally with leadership and a lot of the current trajectories I'm seeing for young people, it's always a sense of self. How am I going to get there? What am I going to do? What can I get from this? Where's my this? And and sometimes I often think we just have to reflect on, how can I be of service? Where's my calling? How can I contribute? And in answering those questions, most oftentimes you find yourself on the right trajectory. So it happens,
Wonderful note to end on. I couldn't agree more that it really isn't about us as individuals. It is about service. It's about the other person. It's about, and I think that's such a great perspective to have, because even as you approach the things that you want, it's important to bear in mind the people from whom I need to get these things. What do they need? What do they want? What are their desires? Because then you are in service of your own objectives by serving others. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much.
It's great, Racquel. And I think we have a responsibility as well, in terms of building others and letting them develop their leadership potential, despite the role that they hold in an organization or their role as a member of a team. It's really important to give others the courage and the confidence to be able to contribute their ideas, their thoughts freely, openly, and without judgment. And once that comfort is developed, it's amazing. I've learned most of the things I know about managing a landfill from persons who've worked on a landfill with no formal education for 20 plus years. Yeah. And I did an entire master's degree, and I did not know half as much as they knew working on the ground. So knowledge and that knowledge can come from anywhere. We have to get rid of that sort of barriers that I can learn at school and I can learn from a great book, and knowledge comes in different forms. We just have to have an open mind about it.
Yeah, I'm just remembering my first real job was as a cashier at Red Lobster in the US. And now when you see your cashier at some store, you just assume, well, that's their life. And I certainly at that time had greater aspirations, and many of which realized, not all of them, but anybody from anywhere could do anything. And it's just a matter of seeing the potential and recognizing that we all have infinite potential to change the world. Thank you so much, Nalini. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast with Nalini Sooklal, the General Manager of Recycling Partners of Jamaica. And I hope that you subscribe to the series and learn more about the transformational journey that many of these leaders are taking us through, and a lot about how we can serve others and learn more and do more and create a better world for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Racquel. Take care.
Till next
week. Chatting. Take care.
Bye.